When the palace goes quiet, that's when its secrets are loudest. On an unassuming winter night, Prince William, alone in a dimly lit Kensington study, reaches for a dusty cassette marked in Diana's unmistakable handwriting. What he heard would ignite a chain reaction of fear, fury, and desperate cover-ups. This wasn't just a personal moment, it was a direct threat to the very fabric of the monarchy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It had been a restless evening, one of those nights when memories refuse to stay buried. William found himself pacing the halls, passing portraits of monarchs who once ruled with iron grace yet left behind trails of unspoken truths. Something led him back to that room, the study, his mother's old room, repurposed, remodeled, but still haunted by her presence. He had passed that antique cabinet countless times, but this night felt different. Something was calling to him. His hand trembled as he slid the brass key into the lock of the drawer that, until now, had always remained shut. Inside was nothing extravagant, just a cassette tape, unmarked, no label, no case. But he knew that voice was on there. Diana. For several moments he simply stared at it. The weight of the object in his palm felt heavier than it should have. He could feel the pull of something dangerous, sacred even. Was this something he was meant to hear, or something he was never supposed to find? Questions swirled in his mind as he sat at the edge of the desk, tape player open and waiting. His fingers hovered over the play button. Then, with a deep breath that shook more than he cared to admit, he pressed it. There was static at first. A pause. Then came her voice. Gentle, uncertain, but unmistakably hers. Diana. The same voice that had once comforted him as a child now echoed into the sterile stillness of the palace study. If this is being heard, I may already be gone, she said, and with that single line, the room froze around him. He leaned closer, eyes wide, barely breathing. Her tone was measured, but there was a deep tremor beneath her words, an urgent desperation that gripped him. She wasn't simply speaking, she was warning. With each passing second, William's expression changed from surprise to disbelief, then to something darker, something like fear. His shoulders tensed, jaw clenched, as Diana's confessions unfolded in real time. She spoke not to the world, not to the media, but to him, her son. Her voice, although calm, carried the weight of a secret that had been buried beneath decades of royal protocol and orchestrated silence. The tape crackled as it continued, but William could barely focus on the words. He was overwhelmed by the reality that this had existed all along, somewhere beneath his feet, while he moved about his life in full view of a royal institution that may have known about it the entire time. And then, as if the walls were listening too, the power flickered, just for a second, but it was enough to make him sit up. Later, reports would confirm that a single palace surveillance feed went dark at the exact time William pressed play. A security anomaly unusual, unexplained. But in that moment, William didn't know. He only knew the room had gone colder. His hands trembled, the air felt heavier, and his mother's voice continued, leading him toward truths that no one wanted uncovered. The silence of the palace wasn't quiet anymore, it was deafening. And as the tape rolled on, William's eyes widened. There was no turning back now. But what exactly did Diana say on that tape, and why was it hidden in a drawer only William could open? This wasn't a letter, it wasn't a diary entry. It was a direct, unfiltered recording, Diana's voice unshackled by advisors or protocol. In it, she names names, exposes betrayals, and issues a chilling prophecy about her sons, her death, and a hidden war in sea. The palace. The voice that poured from the tape wasn't that of a helpless victim. It was that of a woman cornered, but not broken. Diana sounded calm, deliberate, but each word carried the weight of knowing too much. Her tone wasn't filled with fear, it was filled with urgency. Like someone racing against time to preserve a truth the world was never meant to hear. She didn't speak in plain admissions. No, she knew better than that. What she revealed was cloaked in careful language, protected by subtle codes. But for William, who knew her heart and pain better than anyone, the meaning was crystal clear. She spoke of whispers in corridors, of unnamed arrangements to remove what the palace deemed inconvenient. She spoke of meetings held without her, decisions made above her head, and the eerie feeling that her fate had already been sealed. She used no specific dates, only references. Phrases like "before the crash" and "after they warned me not to speak again" left William breathless. Yes, wide. Hands frozen. And then came the moment that made his pulse stop. "They told me," she said, her voice almost cracking, "that if I didn't fall in line, they'd ensure I was remembered in their image, not mine." A pause. "Then, there's a plan. You see, a plan to silence me. It's not loud, it's not violent, it's polished. Institutional. They'll smile for the cameras as they destroy me quietly behind velvet curtains." William could feel the tremble in her words, and what chilled him most was not the idea of conspiracy, it was that she had predicted every move they made after her death. The staged mourning, the heavily edited documentaries, the tight control over her legacy, every part of it had unfolded just as she'd warned. She didn't just talk about herself, she spoke of her sons, both of them. Her voice softened, then hardened as she pleaded, "Don't let them turn you into what they wanted me to be: silent, controlled, decorative. You were born for more than this crown, both of you." She went on to describe the subtle manipulation she feared was already happening: well-meaning tutors, controlled press appearances, and scripted public personas carefully crafted to suit the palace's long-term vision. "They'll tell you who you are," she warned, "and if you listen, you'll forget who I was." What made the tape so powerful wasn't just what Diana revealed, it was how she said it. There were no tears, no hysteria, just certainty. The kind that can only come from someone who has seen behind the curtain and lived to tell the tale until she didn't. "I was told not to share this," she confessed. "Not even with you. But I couldn't go to my grave knowing that no one knew the truth." She hinted at names, never outright, but carefully dropped phrases, titles, and associations. A shadowed figure in the duchy, a smiling woman with too many secrets, a loyal servant with a dagger hidden behind his loyalty. To outsiders, they'd sound like metaphors. But to William, they were portrait. Drawn in code. Faces he recognized. People he trusted. The tape was coming to its end, but Diana had saved her most piercing words for last. "Don't let them rewrite me," she said. "Don't let them tell you I was crazy, that I was unstable, that I imagined all of it. I know what I saw. I know what they did. And if you're hearing this..." Her voice cracked. "For the first and only time, they've already begun their plan for you too." William felt his throat tighten. For years he had buried suspicion beneath duty. Now it was all unraveling. The truth didn't knock, it broke in. And just as he reached to replay the final few minutes, his heart racing, the worst realization struck. The drawer was no longer empty. A small envelope that had sat behind the tape gone. And with it a piece of the puzzle he never even knew he needed. William heard her words, but he wasn't the only one. Someone else knew that tape existed, and now it was missing from the royal archive. By dawn, the walls of the Alice were buzzing. Not with voices, but with fear. An anonymous email was sent to the Queen's private secretary, marked urgent. Attached? A low-quality audio clip. Diana's voice. Someone had leaked a portion of the tape, but who? And why now? The monarchy thrives on control, carefully curated images, managed narratives, locked rooms with only one key, but that control was slipping, and fast. The email arrived at 4:17 a.m., bypassing usual vetting procedures and landing directly in the Queen's confidential inbox. The audio clip was short, barely 90 seconds long, but it was enough to make the blood run cold across every floor of Buckingham Palace. Diana's voice was unmistakable. And within those haunting words, she named a senior royal only vaguely, but with enough clarity for those inside the system to understand exactly who she meant. It wasn't just a leak, it was a threat, a declaration that the truth had begun to seep out, and the walls built to protect it were now paper-thin. Initial reaction was chaos masquerading as protocol. Palace staff were summoned within minutes. Every department's internal communications were locked down. Devices were swept, phones confiscated. And without so much as a whisper to the public, the Queen authorized the formation of a covert task force, handpicked security personnel and legal minds, loyal not to law but to the Crown. Their mission was singular: contain the breach, identify the source, and neutralize the threat before it became irreversible. But as they scrambled to trace the email's origin, The deeper they dug, the more disturbing the picture became. The IP address was cloaked, routed through layers of encryption used only by state-level operatives or someone with intimate knowledge of royal protocols. This wasn't the work of a random hacktivist or tabloid infiltrator. This was someone inside. Someone who had access. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. And then the whispers began. How did anyone outside the room even know the tape existed? Who else had a copy? Why had it surfaced just hours after William listened to it? Eyes that had once looked at the future king with admiration now narrowed with suspicion. In hushed tones, his name surfaced in briefings not as a victim, but as a potential source. The theory, though unthinkable, gained momentum. Had William leaked his own mother's voice to force the palace's hand? Or had someone close to him done it, with or without his blessing? The tension turned inward. Long-trusted advisors began second-guessing one another. Aides who had shared tea the day before now moved silently past each other in the halls, avoiding eye contact. Old rivalries resurfaced. Everyone knew the monarchy had enemies, but no one had considered one might be wearing the crown. In the space of hours, loyalty was no longer assumed, it had to be proven. And in the middle of it all, William had disappeared. No scheduled appearance, no prepared statement, no trace of movement. His security team, usually visible, had gone completely dark. And with no one to vouch for his whereabouts, the theory only deepened. Did he go underground to prepare a bigger blow or to hide from one? As the palace scrambled, William vanished from public view, and that's when the Queen summoned the ultimate emergency council. Behind gilded doors, beneath the glittering chandeliers of Balmoral's inner chambers, a war room was formed. The Queen sat motionless as her most loyal aides debated the unthinkable. Has William, the future king, gone rogue? And if so, what happens next? The monarchy was no stranger to scandal. It had survived abdications, divorces, and public outrage. But this was different. This was internal. The enemy wasn't on the front page of a tabloid, it was standing in the line of succession. And as the leaked audio clip gained traction in back channels and security reports warned of a full public breach, the fear inside the palace turned ice cold. Advisors warned that if the rest of Diana's tape ever made it online, the damage would be irreversible. The monarchy wouldn't just be embarrassed, it would be exposed. The narrative, once tightly controlled, would unravel. The public would start asking questions the palace had no intention of ever answering. And yet, in the center of this storm, the Queen said nothing. Her silence, once regarded as regal restraint, now cast a long shadow across the room. To her aides, it was unsettling. To her family, it was a warning. She was watching, calculating, not grieving, not confused, but poised for something. That silence left space for panic to spread, and speculation soon followed. One particularly vocal advisor, loyal to the crown for over 3 decades, dared to suggest what no one else would say aloud, that William, in his grief and idealism, had allowed emotion to override duty. Perhaps, he whispered, it would be wise for the prince to quietly retreat from public life. Temporarily. The word hung in the air, lick, e-smoke, exile, without saying it. Silence dressed as strategy. Camilla, never one to sit idly, stepped forward. Her voice, once dismissed in royal circles, now cut through the chatter. She demanded clarity. Was her name mentioned in the tape? Had Diana spoken of her? The room froze. No one answered, and that silence said everything. Camilla knew Diana's voice still held power, and if that voice had painted her as complicit directly or by implication, it could destroy the fragile legitimacy she'd spent decades trying to build. That fear pushed her to act. She called for full access to the tape. She wanted transcripts. She wanted guarantees that her name would be protected at all costs. She reminded them all, if the monarchy falls, none of them survive it. Meanwhile, the quiet hunt for answers continued. Under the guise of protocol, palace intelligence operatives requested access to William's phone logs. The explanation was simple, routine data checks following a leak. But everyone knew the truth. They were building a timeline, tracking calls, searching for digital fingerprints that might confirm the worst suspicion that the future king had not just heard the tape, but shared it. Even Charles, torn between his role as father and sovereign-to-be, found himself unraveling. In public, he defended William, calling the leak a targeted attack on the family's private grief. But behind closed doors, his confidence cracked. His conversations with the Queen grew cold. Friction, unspoken for years, now boiled beneath their words. He began to question everything: his influence, his legacy, his own wife's ambitions. And still, William remained silent. His absence stretched into a third day. Questions swirled. Was he planning a counterstrike? Was he hiding? Was he broken by the weight of his mother's voice, or preparing to unleash it completely? The palace had never felt more fragile. Power didn't feel secure, it felt borrowed. But before they could decide William's fate, he returned. Ned with a message that left even the Queen speechless. No press, no statement, no entourage. William emerged alone, walking through the side gate of Windsor, tape in hand. What he told the Queen in that room would alter the family's course and test the strength of the crown like never before. They had waited days. Whispers filled the palace halls, growing louder with each hour of his silence. But when he finally appeared, there were no theatrics, no grand entrance. Just William, face hardened, eyes darker than they remembered. The Queen was already seated when he entered. Advisors held their breath. He didn't bow, he didn't smile. He placed the cassette on the table before her, and with a voice stripped of ceremony, he spoke. He had listened to the entire tape, every second, every pause, every name. And what he found wasn't just his mother's truth, it was their institution's lie. "You didn't just fail her," he said, voice trembling but unbroken. "You erased her. You buried her twice, once in the ground and once in history." The room fell into stunned silence. William revealed what none of them had dared imagine: he had made copies. Multiple. Digitized. Secured. And if they tried to corner him, tried to silence him as they had her, the tapes would be released. All of them. No edits. No palace-approved statements. Raw and real. "You think I'm doing this to destroy the monarchy?" he said. "I'm doing this to stop it from becoming the machine that consumed her." His hands were steady, his eyes unwavering. He wasn't making a threat, he was drawing a line. And for the first time, the Queen didn't look composed. She looked shaken. Not because she didn't believe him, but because she knew he meant every word. She asked him calmly to hand over the original. For the sake of the family. For the unity of the nation. For tradition. But William didn't flinch. "No," he said, with quiet steel. "Tradition didn't protect her. It killed her." That refusal changed everything. This wasn't a son seeking vengeance. This was a man standing in the wreckage of his mother's legacy, refusing to let history be rewritten by those who survived her. William didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for approval. He turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving behind the stunned faces of monarchs and advisors who had never before been challenged from within their own bloodline. Charles followed. Not as a king in waiting, but as a father trying to bridge an impossible divide. He caught up to William, called his name once soft, uncertain. William stopped, but he didn't turn around. "You told me we had to protect the crown," he said, voice hollow. "But who protected her?" There was no response, because there was none to give. Charles stood in the silence, torn between two legacies: his mother's throne and his late wife's memory, one built on duty, the other on truth. And in that moment, he knew he might lose both. The palace never issued a statement, but inside its walls, the term quietly spread among staff, whispered like a warning: the tape crisis. A phrase that carried with it the weight of the monarchy's deepest fear, not rebellion from the outside, but a reckoning from within. As word spread through the palace halls, the staff dubbed it the tape crisis. But the worst wasn't over, not by a long shot. While the palace reeled, Camilla was already moving. To her, this was more than a scandal, it was a threat to everything she had fought for. And if Diana's voice was returning from the grave, Camilla would make sure it was silenced again. She had watched the chaos unfold with clenched fists and a tightening jaw. This wasn't some youthful rebellion or media blunder. It was a direct assault on her legacy, her marriage, and her position within the royal family. She demanded the full transcript of the tape from palace aides, bypassing pleasantries and formalities. She wanted every word Anna had uttered, every name mentioned, every line that might draw blood. And when she saw it, when she read her own name, woven into Diana's warnings like a poisoned thread, her composure shattered. Camilla had weathered years of public scrutiny, had clawed her way back into royal favor. But this wasn't a headline. It was a ghost with a voice, and it was louder than hers. Within hours, Camilla took action. Not publicly, of course, that wasn't her style, but quietly, strategically. A series of stories began circulating through certain press channels suggesting that the tape was suspiciously timed, poorly verified, possibly even a deepfake. The narrative was subtle but sharp: emotional manipulation, outdated grievances, technology twisted for impact. It was the beginning of a carefully crafted smear campaign, not against Diana, but against William, against his judgment, his emotional state, his ability to lead. He was grieving, yes, but perhaps unstable, maybe even dangerous to the institution itself. Camilla knew where to plant the seeds, and she knew exactly who would help water them. Behind palace walls, she pushed Charles to take a stand. "You need to condemn this," she told him. "If you don't, it will be your son versus your crown." But Charles wavered. His heart was torn between duty and damage control. Camilla, however, had no such conflict. Her voice grew firmer, her demands sharper, and when persuasion failed, she acted alone. In a move known only to a handful of insiders, Camilla requested a meeting not with royal advisors, but with former intelligence contacts still loyal to the throne. MI5 liaisons, off the record, off the royal books. She wanted to know how secure the copies of the tape really were. Who had access? Who could be watching? Who needed to be watched? For Camilla, this wasn't personal, it was existential. If the public turned on her again, if the old wounds reopened, her entire presence in the monarchy could collapse. She wouldn't let that happen. Not after all these years, not after everything she had endured to stand beside Charles without apology. Diana had haunted her life in silence. Now, her voice threatened to undo it all, and Camilla was prepared to strike first. But William wasn't backing down. In fact, he was preparing for a move so bold it would shake the monarchy's foundations. It only takes one spark to start a fire. A 47-second clip of Diana's tape leaked onto social media, and within hours, hashtags like #DianaWasRight and #JusticeForDiana flooded the internet. The people weren't waiting for Buckingham's version of the truth anymore. Barred the audio was raw, grainy, but unmistakably real. Diana's voice trembled with courage as she spoke of betrayal, manipulation, and fear. It was the part where she said, "They'll smile for the cameras while burying me in silence," that broke the internet open. Millions of users shared the clip, stitching together fragments of her past interviews, comparing timelines, decoding implications. What had been whispered behind palace gates was now shouted in every comment section across the globe. The monarchy's carefully crafted image, duty, dignity, control was unraveling in real time. And this time, it wasn't a tabloid fabrication. It was her voice, her words, her warning, and the public had heard it. People demanded the full tape. Online petitions garnered millions of signatures in hours. Outside Buckingham, the crowds grew restless. Protest signs appeared not against William, but in support of him. Let her speak. Truth before titles. We remember Diana. A new generation, one that didn't witness her fall but had grown up idolizing her, now rose to defend her truth. In this moment, the monarchy wasn't facing scandal, it was facing revolution. This wasn't about tradition anymore. It was about trust, and that trust had fractured. Inside the royal family, the rift widened. Younger royals scrambled to position themselves, some distanced, some remained quiet. But one voice broke through the silence: Harry. Though thousands of miles away, he made a private call to William. No one heard what was said, but insiders confirmed the two brothers spoke for nearly an hour. Whatever their rift had been, this moment had cut deeper than any feud. Diana's voice had done what the family could not. It reminded them both of what they had lost, and who had taken it. Meanwhile, paparazzi surged, not just around Windsor or Buckingham, but around anyone with even a passing connection to the family. Former staff, old friends of Diana, distant cousins, none were spare. The headlines multiplied. The Prince's War. What Charles knew: Camilla under pressure. The palace was bleeding out through 1,000 headlines, and they couldn't plug them fast enough. Polls began to shift drastically. For the first time in decades, public favour dipped below the line of monarchy support. Even die-hard royalists began questioning what else had been hidden. What else had Diana left behind? Celebrities began to take sides, some cryptic, others loud. Former friends of Diana, long silenced by fear or respect, began giving interviews. Not all pointed fingers, but all supported the same idea: Diana's voice was valid. Her story mattered, and it had been buried too long. Activists, podcasters, influencers, people who had never spoken about the royal family now had a cause. And William became an unwilling icon, a symbol not just of grief, but of reckoning. From the fringes, Diana's old allies re-emerged: former bodyguards, charity partners, even journalists who had once been discredited for running her story now found their work validated. Suddenly, the question wasn't whether the monarchy had misled the public. The question was how long they had done it and what they were willing to do to keep it hidden. Faced with a public storm and an heir refusing to be silenced, the palace made one final desperate move. The crown's survival now came down to one impossible decision: bury the tape and risk losing William, or burn the old truths, release the tape and face the wrath of history. Behind closed doors, royal bloodlines battled not just for legacy but for survival. The palace had weathered storms before, but never one like this. In the deepest chambers of royal council, beneath layers of tradition and secrecy, the family gathered not to mourn, not to plan a jubilee, but to cast votes on a matter that threatened the entire institution. It wasn't ceremonial, it was war. An emergency vote was called by the Queen herself, with only the most senior and loyal figures present. The question laid before them was simple, yet devastating: suppress the remainder of the tape entirely, or allow a controlled release to salvage credibility. Two paths, one cloaked in silence, the other paved in fire. The discussion was tense, interrupted only by long pauses and exchanged glances, some filled with fear, others with fury. Camilla, icy and firm, lobbied for total suppression. Charles, torn between guilt and survival, leaned toward damage control. A few progressive voices in the family whispered that truth, no matter how uncomfortable, was the only way forward. But the vote was split, divided not by age or title, but by allegiance to the monarchy or to the memory of Diana. As the room cracked under the weight of its own indecision, William stood and walked out without a word. No vote, no appeal, just silence, leaving behind a table of monarchs and cowards. Hours later, the Queen summoned William in private. No staff, no protocol, just mother and grandson, bound by power and shame. The confrontation was quiet, but piercing. She asked him what he hoped to gain. He asked her what she feared most: that the public would know the truth, or that they would know she had hidden it. And then, without anger, without hesitation, she confessed. Years ago, shortly after Diana's death, she had heard fragments of the tape. Just enough to know what it was. Just enough to choose not to listen further. Just enough to lock it away. Her eyes welled as she said the words, "I didn't know what to do, so I did nothing." William didn't scream. He didn't collapse. He only nodded, because deep down, he had always known. And perhaps so had she. The next morning, chaos. Reporters flooded the gates of Kensington Palace. William had made a move no one expected. He delivered a sealed envelope to the international press. No explanation, no interviews. Just a statement: "My mother asked to be heard. Let her speak." The world braced for another recording, another leak. But it wasn't audio. It was something far more personal. The envelope contained a handwritten letter, never before seen, never before mentioned. A letter from Diana addressed to William, dated months before her death. In it, she wrote of hope, of fear, of her belief that one day truth would matter more than power. The language was unmistakably hers, poetic, brave, and heartbreakingly prophetic. "You may not be able to change them," she wrote, "but never let them change you." The publication of the letter detonated across every platform, drowning out spin, deflecting defiance. The monarchy's silence could no longer compete with Diana's voice, now etched in ink and immortalized in history. The world had changed. The royal family was no longer the sole keeper of its story. That power had shifted, perhaps forever. And as William watched the world read his mother's final words, he knew one thing: the fight was far from over, but the silence was. The tape was only the beginning. What Diana left behind in that letter would ignite a new storm no crown could contain. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.